And rolling, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good part of the day to everyone. Thank you for joining Large Scale Scrum Meetup of New York City, the largest and pretty quickly growing community for years. Today we have a special treat, a special event. I always say this, but today is actually pretty special. We have two guests joining us, and I would like to just spend a few minutes introducing them both. I'm really excited to have you both, guys. So I'm going to start with Richard because you're the special guest. You're outside of the LeSS community per se, and I'm honored to have you here, Richard Hundhausen. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your last name right.
Yeah, very good. You must be German.
Yes, I figured. So just a few words about Richard. He's a software developer and consultant with over 30 years of experience in the industry. He understands that software is built and delivered by people and not by processes and tools. So Richard is also a co-creator of Nexus Scaled Scrum Framework. As such, of course, he's also a professional Scrum trainer and professional Scrum developer. And he's the author of Professional Scrum Development with Azure and DevOps. So it's a pleasure having you in the studio, in the room today with us, Richard. And the second co-presenter is my good friend and colleague from the LeSS community, well-known Greg Hutchings. I think you're originally from the US, and your accent will speak to it, but you have been living in France for a while, for a long time. Greg is a certified LeSS trainer who is also a qualified a teacher and coach on product management and Agile development. He's great at pure play Agile training and coaching through his own startup, Amelia Services, I think from 2015, you kicked off the company. And your past work with ThoughtWorks and Valtech is well known. You are well known with startups, new product development, NPD, automotive, luxury, and digital. Entertainment, e-commerce, finance, industrials, education. Those are your areas of work. And without any further ado, because those lists may go on and on, I would like to pass the baton over to you, gentlemen. I know you have done some backstage conversations, some prep work, and what you're going to bring to us here could be very interesting. In fact, I explicitly wanted to stay out. I'm interested in hearing myself what you have come up with as the agenda. Okay, so I'm going to pass over to Richard. I'm going to make you a co-host in case if you wish to share anything.
All right. Thank you, Gene.
Also, my kind ask to the crowd, to the audience, keep your cameras on if you can, keep your mics off, absolutely, until you have to say something. And that's about it. Okay, and enjoy. Off to you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Gene. Quick question about the interruption protocol. If there is a question and I invite questions, should that go to the chat? Should that get unmuted? What's the preference here?
I typically, I monitor, since I don't speak, you speak. I'll be monitoring the chat room. The question to the audience, if you just want to exchange, do so at will. But if it's the question to one of the speakers, make sure you make it sweet to the point, succinct, and prefix it with a Q and a colon. Q, colon, question. Try not to be verbose, try to be to the point. Fair enough?
Nice.
And Gene, you'll manage the questions, so we don't have to look at the chat.
I'll be keeping my eye on those until you finish with the main convo and become more attentive to the chat. But I'll be looking at.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Great. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, friends, from wherever you're at. This is a fun talk. I'm looking forward to this. And I've got another co-creator of Nexus on the call here too. I just noticed Jesse from the Netherlands, so he'll keep me honest and help answer those questions too if things come up. But I thought what I'd do is just share my screen and just make sure everyone can see the diagram here. I wanted to spend just a few moments walking through the Nexus framework. Since this is a LeSS meetup, then the thought is maybe not everyone has seen this diagram or had the 30,000 foot flyover of Nexus. So I thought I would just walk through here. I'm sure this will generate some questions. So Gene, be monitoring things for me. And I don't want to spend too much time here because honestly, If you squint, this is Scrum. You know, some of the same artifacts, events, and roles are in here. So I'm gonna spend time talking more about what we call the exoskeleton. So the idea of Nexus is at scale. So we're talking 3 or more teams working on a single product, one product owner, one product backlog. You know, those things stand firm the whole time. We need additional exoskeleton to help identify and mitigate dependencies. So if you had to boil the Nexus framework down into one concept, it is to identify and remove dependencies. Okay, we take the opinion that dependencies are bad and we need to be on the lookout for them. Okay, with that in mind, just kind of work from left to right here, since that's kind of a good way to go through the flow here. We've got a product backlog, just like in a normal single team Scrum. One thing that is different is we have an event, which is cross team refinement. In single team Scrum, it's a practice, it's optional, but at scale, it's required. It should be an event, you know, who attends, how you do it, when you do it, how often you do it. That's up to the Nexus to decide. But it is super important to be always on the lookout for those upcoming dependencies that we do mandate that the cross team refinement is an event. So just like in normal single team Scrum, you get your backlog in good shape. That's brought into your Nexus sprint planning, still keeping the idea of 30 days or less as the length of the sprint. That hasn't changed. In Nexus sprint planning, this is going to be one of the big room or big Zoom meeting events where you've got all the teams there, plus the product owner, plus all the Scrum masters, everyone's involved, any stakeholders that need to be there for clarification. At the beginning of the Nexus sprint planning meeting, you have sort of a pre-meeting, as the way I describe it, where representatives of each team take a look at the refined product backlog, give kind of the final okay on, yeah, we think we can do these items this sprint and this team can do those items in order to minimize the dependencies. Then those PBIs, product backlog items, are taken back to the individual teams where normal sprint planning takes place. You know, the 3 parts, the why, the what, the how. And when each individual team's sprint planning is completed, Nexus sprint planning is completed. And the output of that is each individual team has their sprint backlog, you know, their plans, the selected forecasted items, plus there'll be a Nexus sprint goal, which is an overarching goal that provides guidance to the entire Nexus for the sprint, or possibly a couple sprints. You know, it's not necessarily bound to a sprint here. A new artifact you'll see here is the Nexus sprint backlog. And what this does is make visual all of the product backlog items, the PBIs, the forecasted work across the teams, and any dependencies between them. So the thinking is, if there are dependencies, so if Scrum Team 1 is dependent on Scrum Team 3 to get their item done, and you know, halfway through the sprint, Scrum Team 3 hasn't started moving on that one yet, this board will make that visual. So somebody can go and say, hey, Scrum Team 3, you need to get going. There's other teams depending on this item being finished. So it's just a way to stay, for the Nexus to stay accountable for those dependencies during the sprint. I describe it as a read-only, you know, aggregation of all the individual teams' sprint backlogs, just of their forecasted work. Okay, the big circle here is just, you know, development, the, you know, 3 to 9 Scrum teams doing their thing, you know, creating integrated increment according to definition of done. I like to point out that the 3 cogs, the 3 wheels there on the triangle, represent technical excellence. So strong reliance on automated build, automated testing, automated deployment, you know, classic DevOps kinds of things. Because at scale, you're going to need a lot of machinery to help you out. That's our thinking. One question I'm going to ask and answer myself here that always comes up is, if you're familiar with the scrum.org colors, you know, red is the developer accountability, blue is the Scrum Master accountability, and green is the product owner accountability. And it looks like in this diagram that there are 6 total product owners. Don't take the bait. Those are not people. That's the role. That product owner role is played by a single person. It's just we're putting them kind of virtually in all of those different teams. Okay. I'm going to come back and talk about the Nexus integration team at the end. So at the beginning of each day, or whenever, you know, the Nexus decides they have their Nexus daily Scrum. What this is a pre-meeting ahead of the individual teams' daily Scrums, where representatives of each team, each Scrum team, and let the Nexus decide who that is, they get together and they make transparent any integration issues that have occurred in the last 24 hours, anything that the other teams need to get a heads up about. And it could be not just technical things, it could be people things, domain issues, issues with you know, the DevOps tooling, whatever. Maybe it doesn't affect Scrum Team 4, but Scrum Team 2 ran into something yesterday and wants to make that transparent. So in the Nexus Daily Scrum, all the representatives are taking notes, and then they take those notes as input into their daily Scrums. Those daily Scrums, the little stack of circles up here in the corner, those are just your normal daily Scrums, 15-minute time box, you know, create a plan for the next 24 hours, taking into that discussion things that came out of the Nexus Daily Scrum. I describe it as kind of like a Scrum of Scrums, but it happens prior to the daily Scrums, and it's required, so it's mandated each day. Can you still do Scrum of Scrums? Of course. Scrum of Scrums is just people getting together and talking, and just like any good Scrum implementation, we don't disallow that. Hopefully, by the end of the sprint, we create an integrated increment. It's different than an increment in that it's integrated across all the Scrum teams. Now, we want this to be done daily, or, you know, it'd be great if your DevOps were up to speed. You could do it every time someone does a push. You know, the build happens, the tests run, and the integrated, you know, deployment happens so that someone could start testing it right away. We don't mandate it has to be continuously deployed. I think it's great. I like to help teams get to that point. I know Jesse's a fan, but we just say, you know, you need to get an integrated increment created prior to the end of the sprint, which is that's a pretty high bar, pretty actually low bar to cross. At the end of the sprint, just like in single team Scrum, you have a Nexus sprint review. This is another sort of big room or big Zoom meeting event where you're showing off higher level features, if you will, that maybe apply to the stakeholders that they care about. And it could be a very, very large event. You know, you might have, I don't know, 50 stories done that roll up into 10 features that are completed. More than likely, you're just focusing on the end-to-end feature, you know, inspection at this review. And you need to maybe have some practices there, some video assistance, or maybe the bazaar or the expo, the car show. I've heard it called different things, so that you're not boring everybody by watching a single, you know, presentation of all the features end to end. So after you inspect and adapt the what, you move into a Nexus sprint retrospective where you inspect and adapt the how. Again, this is a pre-meeting where representatives of the different Scrum teams get together, make transparent observations and inspections from throughout the sprint. You know, stick to the questions: what went well, what didn't go well, what might we try to improve. Those are shared across the different Scrum teams as input to their individual sprint retrospectives. Those happen like normal. You know, when those are finished, one thing that's different with this big room meeting is we pull the not big room meeting, but the Nexus exoskeleton meeting, is we pull representatives back together again for like an end meeting, so that we can make transparent what sort of experiments, what improvements are going to be occurring across the teams. That helps keep it all visible. It also is a form of accountability, in my opinion. So if Scrum Team 2 hears that Scrum Team 5 is going to start doing something different in the next sprint, you know, they might hold them to it next time they have a sprint retrospective. And then it repeats. You know, you go right back into Nexus sprint planning. So last thing before I stop talking is the Nexus integration team. Probably the most misunderstood piece of Nexus. This is not a separate team. This is not a separate standalone team. The people on the Nexus integration team come from the individual Scrum teams. So it's sort of a just-in-time virtual team that is there as an accountability for any integration issues. In other words, if the wheels, the cogs fall apart and the whole Nexus grinds to a halt, yes, we want the people doing the work to fix it, but unless someone's accountable for it, you know, there might be a delay or something like that. So the way that I describe it is individual members of the Scrum teams, and it's always to include the product owner and at least one Scrum master, but the composition of the developers can be, you know, 2 people from this team, 1 person from that team, maybe somebody from outside the Nexus if necessary. And they're all wearing an armband that says, I'm on the Nexus integration team. You know, I'm on the fire brigade for this sprint. And if nothing bad happens, they just keep on doing their work, keep working on their Scrum teams. But if the bat signal ever goes off and something grinds to a halt, or something, you know, causes an integration issue, you know, their armband activates, the bat light goes on, they hustle off, and they're the ones accountable for doing the work. They don't do the work. Okay, this is just like a Scrum Master stance. They're accountable for it. So just because the wheels fell off and the Nexus integration team gets the call, they're still going to coach, mentor, consult, train. They're going to take those kinds of stances with the regular Scrum team members to rectify that. Okay, they're not the cleanup crew. They're not the maid. You know, they're not the mother of the Nexus. They're people who are accountable for encouraging other people on the Scrum teams to actually do the work. Okay, I think that's it. I'm sure there's lots of questions.
Maybe I'll just respond quickly if it's, or otherwise we can just go to questions. I've made kind of a net differences with Les.
Mm-hmm. It's up to you, gentlemen. There's 3 questions that are already in the pipeline, but it's up to you. You want to take those, Richard, or Greg? Do you want to?
I'd like to just comment briefly. So, you know, as Richard said, he and I spent some really nice, enjoyable, and long conversations getting ready for this. And I attended the similar meetup talk in Berlin, and I really loved it. And I realized I really want to get to know Richard. This guy thinks a lot like I do. So to me, the first message I would say to the LeSS meetup in New York is Nexus and LeSS are friends. We're so similar that if it weren't for the personalities of the people that created the 2 frameworks, there could just be one. And I would prefer that there just be one, because it confuses the market to try and decide which, you know, do you want 2% or whole milk? But that said, there are some differences. So the Nexus that we've just seen is up to 9 teams. And apparently there's a larger version that you learn about in the training. LeSS has 2 frameworks, LeSS and LeSS Huge. So LeSS is for up to 8 teams, and then LeSS Huge can be up for hundreds of teams. So there is a scaled approach to LeSS that at the level of frameworks is and has been available since the first 2 books were published. They used to be called Frameworks 1 and 2, and then they'd be called LeSS and LeSS Huge. Another difference, though, is really what LeSS is. So in LeSS, if you think of the LeSS onion with the principles, the frameworks, the guides, and the experiments, it's a broad thinking system which has 10 principles, one of which is LeSS Scrum, and there are 9 others, some of which are naturally symmetric with Scrum, like transparency, continuous improvement, and some which are not really emphasized in Nexus or Scrum, systems thinking, lean thinking, queuing theory. So if I were to advise a client who wants to do an agile transformation and should they use Nexus or LeSS, I'd be very comfortable recommending either one at the level of the framework. And if it was large scale, I would definitely want them to do systems thinking, to understand lean thinking, and emphasize, especially with management, a change in how they think. I don't think senior management, who I frequently work with, are really very interested at the level of the framework. And they're interested in business impact, change management, changes in the organizational structure. So LeSS normally also begins with a significant change in an organizational structure with an informed consent meeting where you talk about what this is going to mean to really change. And you might walk away as a LeSS coach because the organization, it's not the right time, or they don't have the will to change. That's not always the best outcome, but there's a lot more detailed reconciliation, but I don't think that that's the important point right now. To me, all I really wanted to say is I think we're basically brothers or cousins. We're in the same, highly aligned mindset. And I would personally be just as comfortable to teach Nexus as I teach LeSS, although I'm not qualified to, from what I know about it. And I think that the kind of differences that a methods framework person are going to point out, like the knit, the integration team that exists in Nexus and doesn't in LeSS. Frankly, on the fly, you can create such a team in LeSS, and it sometimes happens. It's just not as formalized. The retrospective pattern I like in Nexus, where you do a merge, diverge, merge. In LeSS, you do initially a diverge. You start at the team level, then you do the overall retro, and some alignment in advance is nice. The pre-meetings, in which things are kind of pre-assigned to reduce dependency to teams in sprint planning that Richard described, I'm a little uncomfortable with, and I'd want to live through that, because I don't want to locally sub-optimize or be more directive to teams about what they should work on. I really like the pull mechanism in sprint planning in LeSS, where any team can pull any item and there may be a discussion about it. I've facilitated that many times, and I like the interactions by whoever is there in the sprint planning, deciding who's going to work on what. It creates a kind of a exciting free-for-all. It's not as well planned, and it creates more dynamic as a result, which I like. That's all I'm going to say. Let's go to the people's questions.
Before we jump, so Greg and Richard, are you guys done with the formal presentation, if you will? Are we ready to go to Q&A?
Well, Gene, the only reason I asked that pre-question before we actually started and everybody was on, that might still be good to ask again,
Let's do that.
on a scale of 1 to 5, you know, how well do you know LeSS? So we could assume that the LeSS meetup people know it all really well. If you've been trained, certified, and you've been doing LeSS, I'd say 5 fingers. If you know it quite well, 4. 3 if you're kind of so, and 2 you're really not too comfortable. You couldn't really name the principles. You haven't memorized them. You don't really know what's in the 2 frameworks. And 1, you're a newbie in LeSS. Because we could, if the answer is an average below 3, we should maybe show the less big picture for an instant, or we could just continue on. I'm okay either way.
Let's do that, because the community is fast growing. We don't know who we have.
Maybe if we stop sharing the screen for a second to see the, at least I guess I can just view the gallery view.
Yeah, you can.
I want to see the full speaker. I want to see everybody's faces.
Yeah, if you guys either turn your cameras on or just use the virtual. We got 2s and 3s and 5s.
Keep them up for a minute. Hey, Jens. Some 3s. Not very many videos on in the second or third, so only about a third of people have video on. So you guys are represented by the people with videos. The power. And there are quite a few 1s and 2s actually. So maybe we should show and if you're still if you've still got presentation rights, Richard, you could just go to LeSSworks and show the framework 1 if you wanted.
That's for Richard, right?
Am I sharing? You seen it?
Yeah. There we go.
Okay.
So Richard knows this as well as I do. You have a nice voice, Richard. I prefer listening to you if you want to explain it, or I can as you wish.
I'll let you do it.
All right. So what you see here is also similar to Scrum. If you're looking at the core framework in the middle, and as I described there was more to LeSS in terms of principles and advice and guides, experiments, but focusing just on the framework comparison, you have a sprint planning 1 and 2, similar to what we saw in Nexus. You have 1 sprint for the product, as you do in Nexus. You have product backlog refinement that is multi-team. And as we've been doing LeSS, the more we do it, the more we emphasize multi-team is really important rather than individual team. We have a ratio of 1 Scrum Master for every 1 to 3 teams. That may or may not be a departure from Nexus. I didn't catch that part. If you always still have 1 Scrum Master per team or not.
Just let the Nexus decide that.
Okay. And I appreciate that both these frameworks are not overly specified. People can figure out for themselves what makes sense. We don't have a knit, and we don't have a Nexus Scrum. We don't especially think that Scrum of Scrum is useful, but we do a lot of other coordination activities, open space, the multi-team product backlog refinement. And in sprint planning, we also like to do that in a big room. In virtual multi-site setups, it's not always possible. We, in the sprint review, we have one review for the product. The retrospectives are then by team, and then an overall retro. What we call, rather than an integrated increment, is a potentially shippable product increment, but it is, of course, also integrated. We're also friendly towards DevOps. We also realize that some people don't do continuous integration and continuous delivery. Continuous delivery, I had a class this last week on LeSS online, and I asked, what is continuous integration? And somebody said, well, it's the daily build. So you realize that people are still pretty far in the past in terms of thinking about what continuous really means. To us, it means it's a developer habit of behavior that the developer integrates continuously. I think that's probably good enough. If you haven't already seen this, we have one product owner for the product, just like you do in Nexus. If you went to less huge, you then see one additional layer on the product side, product owner and area product owner, and it would be basically just a series of the same framework combined with one overall product backlog, one overall product owner. And you'd see the same ceremonies that you see here, the same artifacts, the same roles. The only additional role is the area product owner, who acts as product owner to the teams in their area. That's about it. If we're comparing frameworks, if you're trying to compare the two approaches generally, I think, as I mentioned, the systems thinking, lean thinking that we emphasize in LeSS training, most of us are spending a lot of our time doing causal loop diagram systems thinking exercises. And I've become very attached to that as an important outcome of a training. That's all I wanted to say.
Greg, thank you very much for the summary. And I already see a flood of questions. And just by virtue of making a note, I see that Jesse is doing a great job answering some of these, like Q&A. I'm assuming Jesse, Richard is comfortable with Jesse doing it because you guys both represent the co-foundation of Nexus creation, right?
Just making his life easier.
if those questions are still unpacked enough, maybe people can voice them. I have a good chunk. I have parsed the chat room, so I'm prepped. I'm gonna copy paste the whole batch into the chat room. So Richard and Greg, please pick those up in a second. And so I'm gonna exercise the only power I'm gonna exercise here. I'm going to I put one question that we always get on any event. I'm going to make it first, although it didn't come first. And I'm gonna put you, Richard, on a spot because coming from the LeSS community, I think the answer is well known. I'm actually very selfishly interested to hear what you have to say about that. So the first question is, I'm gonna say, how can you compare this to SAFe? Why one framework over the other? So we heard Greg saying friends, brothers, cousins, and so can I throw it at you? Like, considering this is the family, if we can put it that way. Just give me and
Sure.
give everyone else.
Well, and as you may know, Nexus is a direct answer to SAFe. Ken wrote the blog post "Unsafe at Any Speed," and the next thing you know, at Scrum.org, we're changing our priorities and we're working on Nexus. It wasn't called Nexus at the time. It was just how to take the empirical nature of Scrum and scale it gradually. I mean, there's the classic big differences, which are SAFe just, takes a multi-layer template and squeeze it into the great big ball of crap that the organization currently has to try to form some levels and some train tracks and whatever. Nexus assumes you're already doing Scrum, albeit, it could be zombie Scrum. We don't know. Everybody that's doing Scrum might be doing it differently. We like to hope that there's what we call professional Scrum in place prior to Nexus. And then we just focus on the development. We don't worry about alignment with the levels or value streams or, epics. We just assume there's a product backlog with all of those goodness items coming in, curated by the right people. And then we focus on the one problem that development at scale struggles with, which is what? Dependencies. And I want to point out too, dependencies doesn't just mean, hey, team one's, service has a dependency on team three's service. Dependencies in the Nexus could be people dependencies, could be domain knowledge dependencies, could be access to Git repo dependencies. Hey, I don't have the password for your tool dependencies. All that stuff clogs up development. And we strive to identify that and make that visible. And in our 2-day workshop, we have like 60 different practices. Many of the same things that are in LeSS, we talk about in the workshop as complementary practices at scale to make that stuff visible and to really help the Nexus identify those struggles. So I don't know if I helped with that.
Thank you. I think you did, Richard. Greg, did you want to add anything to that? Although
I wanted to add just a quick comment. I meant to mention earlier, the co-creator of LeSS, Bas Voda, says that there are no dependencies, there are only opportunities to work together. So I like that quote because it changes the way you think about dependencies. And something about SAFe that I dislike is their big dependency board with the red strings that people seem to be proud of. The more dependencies they have, the better they feel. And there's a kind of a thinking mistake. If you look for something, you might find it. So I think there's agreement between the brothers on breaking dependencies and that they're important for scaling. But there may be a different level of focus. I think Ken and Nexus are very much more focused on dependencies, and Craig and Bus look at them, among other things, as important for success. My own personal bias is customer focus and alignment of business and development. So even if you build things really well with no dependencies, but it's the wrong product, I'm very concerned about that. So.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you for clarifying this. So, okay, so let's go to the cues that we have collected. I pasted them just if you scroll up. Let me just read them off. How big are the sprints? Are they the same length every 15 days or 1 to 4 weeks? It was posted at the moment when you, Richard, were speaking. So I'm assuming this is about Nexus.
Yeah, so the same rule as with single team Scrum, 30 days or less.
Yep.
Sprint length.
Okay. Good. Next one is, can we quickly compare? Well,
I think we did that.
Comparing LeSS and Nexus on each side, other than someone wants a table. I think
we did that, but I imagine when I was looking at the Nexus diagram that you could do a kind of animation on top of it to convert it into LeSS and see the change, and there wouldn't be too much change, or vice versa. From LeSS, you'd add the knit and the Nexus Scrum daily Scrum meeting, but the changes are really from a gut feeling of an experienced practitioner. I don't think there's any big difference that makes this important to have a debate about it.
Thanks, Greg. There was one question that talks about how many teams Nexus could be kicked off with. And so LeSS is 2 to 8, although 2 is it's probably the barest minimum we can have. What about Nexus? Any recommendations on that?
Yeah, similar. 3 to 9, and this was based on the thinking that just like beyond 9 developers on a Scrum team having a hard time communicating with everybody, beyond 9 Scrum teams in a Nexus, you're getting to the Dunbar number, including all the other stakeholders and everything. But I get asked, why not 2 teams? And I think Jesse answered that in the chat window. Well, why not have 2 people in a single Scrum team? You really don't need it. They can just sort of sit together and work, and you could just handle that with Scrum of Scrums or whatever with just 2 Scrum teams. So we, our sweet spot is 3 to 9, somewhere in the middle.
Yep. Thank you. That's a good answer. So what's the difference between what's the difference between Scrum and Scrum of Scrums and Nexus and NIT, the Nexus integration team? Any like 2 or 3 nuggets? That's the question. Other than you answered some of it, maybe you want to quickly.
Kind of mixing up some things. Or what was the question again?
What's the difference between SOS and NIT?
So
Scrum of Scrums and Nexus.
SOS, as I've seen it used, is where representatives of the development teams, developers, get together, either explicitly or implicitly throughout the day and talk to each other. And we're all about talking to each other, right? Just talk to each other. So I don't think we need to have a formal concept of Scrum of Scrums, especially when we have the Nexus Daily Scrum, which mandates representatives of the team talk to each other prior to the individual team's daily scrums. But you can still do Scrum of Scrums. Nothing wrong with it. We just call it talking to people.
Yeah, I think it's similar, consistent with what we're saying last. Just talk, right?
I just wanted to make a quick comment on that, because some people practice Scrum of Scrum as a meeting of the Scrum Masters after the daily Scrums. And I think that handoff to the Scrum Master role creates more of a project manager mentality rather than a team member collaboration mentality. So that it probably sounds like another alignment between Richard and myself.
Yeah, it should be developers, not Scrum Masters.
Yeah.
Thank you for emphasizing this.
Yeah.
How Nexus deals with external dependencies. So that's assuming outside of the 3 to 9 teams. And then Greg, maybe you want to also volunteer the same or less from less perspective. Richard.
So Nexus external dependencies are very bad, even for a single team Scrum. And the classic I always pull up and use is user acceptance testing. So many organizations just don't trust the Scrum team, or they don't want to let go of the control of the users doing the testing. So here's UAT, and it's part of the definition of done, but the developers don't get any handle on it. So that's a bright red flashing external dependency. And at scale, it's even more scary, because you're holding up potentially multiple teams doing an integrated increment. So whatever tool you're going to use to visualize your dependencies, I say make the external ones bright red and flashing, and maybe add some odor to it as well. So you want to get rid of those as soon as possible.
Love the graphic visualization or olfactory visualization. A comment on that is that, to me, that the external dependencies do happen, but I'm thinking not of that type where you don't know how to do UAT, or you can't have access to the users or something, but more on hardware from working with BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and other companies that are building autonomous driving, where there are sensors that are purchased from third parties and are not yet available, and you can't really finish the feature until you have tested it on the target hardware. So there are conditions that are not manageable easily without simulation and emulation and software techniques, and the dependencies basically are just a fact of life. They don't go away. So I guess the question is, how do you deal with that unless you get the parties together early on? I would involve all the parties in a roadmap workshop, which isn't by the book less, but it's something that I do for that kind of situation of hardware dependencies. And then have members from the outside suppliers that are doing hardware in PBR sessions, product backlog refinement sessions, and go into detail on an understanding of how the software and hardware will be working together incrementally rather than a fixed contract up front. This is hard work, but I would certainly not, I think it's very foolhardy to ignore the external dependencies on especially other suppliers, and hope that it will all work out well as it had in the past with the waterfall process, because it's a very different process when you're doing large scale Agile. And you need your partners to go along with you. There are changes to contracts and all kinds of changes that are a part of that.
So I just saw a question come up from Karen about how do you get rid of external dependencies of UAT. So I'm guessing anybody there put their hand up for struggling with UAT today, currently? Anybody? Just me? How do you get rid of it? Well, single team Scrum, I would say invite those testing type folks onto the development team, become a developer. They're going to be doing other things as well. Same thing with the Nexus. I'm guessing with LeSS, hey, if there's external dependencies, let's retro like crazy to see how we can bring them into the Nexus, into LeSS. And so they're no longer external. Now I know this might quickly grow to, several Nexus implementations, but at least you're all now talking the same language on the same cadence, having the same kind of events, which will minimize some of the risk there with those external dependencies. But leaving them external and just, cussing about it each retrospective, not an answer. That's not a thing you should do.
It's sub-optimizing locally.
Exactly. Yeah, you with your sub-optimizations and global optimizations and yeah. That all you guys do on these LeSS meetups is just talk about
systems thinking.
Systems thinking, yes, right.
We get into that.
Hey, yeah, thank you both. So I'm gonna staple 3 questions for Richard, just because they're so, I think they're relevant. I'm guessing you will agree. And then Greg, I'm gonna ask you to reflect on the same. I think it's worth doing so. Am I understanding that Nexus can work in spite of SAFe if present? And I'm kind of relating this to another question. Can Nexus be adapted to the different Agile framework? And there was like a common delimited Scrum and Kanban teams at the same time. And the third question is tangentially related to this, in my view. What kind of change management method or model would you suggest for a completely new Nexus? Well, it's kind of different. So the first 2 at least seem to be, can we mix the chicken soup and the borscht? So Richard.
So was that inside of or in spite of? I couldn't see what you said.
It's in spite. So in other words, I'm reading SAFe is already installed.
Yeah.
And can we use Nexus, I guess, on top of it, on the side of it, or?
That's difficult because, as you know, SAFe has all these roles and these ceremonies and rituals that if you started doing something weird and productive inside of that, it would get noticed and maybe get ejected. SAFe, if anything, has lots of antibodies to flush out these things when it spots them. Right. So I don't know. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's some great professional Scrum practices that we would recommend that could make SAFe more, I don't know, less risky. But I don't know that Nexus could fit inside of SAFe, if that's what the question is.
Yep. Okay. I think that's fair enough. Greg, your view on LeSS?
Jesse, you got an opinion on that?
Yeah, I've gotten the same question before. SAFe has become quite prolific, and I have a visual response to how to deal with SAFe if you run into it and you're trying to help a company. Can you see the color of the pen here?
Yes.
So you print out the big picture and then you use this pen liberally and get rid of things. And you can descale SAFe by getting rid of levels of hierarchy, getting rid of extra roles, taking away the buzzword bingo that doesn't actually exist, and focus just on the bare elements that actually still exist in Nexus and LeSS. So basically, you don't want to add more to SAFe. You want to take things away from SAFe, and then you can make it quite palatable if you have enough red ink.
I agree, and I think Jesse's done something like that. If I can pass the ball to Jesse sideways. It's
I've seen a number of places where we started doing very professional Scrum at the team level, and started to plan shorter than 3 months cadences together, have more cross-team refinement, try to kind of break that one product owner per team kind of thing by raising the product owner level kind of to something that SAFe doesn't really understand. And starting to introduce kind of more of those things, releasing more often. There's lots of stuff, there's lots of hooks in SAFe that you can tie on. Kind of SAFe says a plan on cadence, release on demand. So we just went, all right, so let's not wait for the end of the sprint. Let's just deploy every day. And at some point, it just started to remove a whole bunch of the kind of puppets that were walking around the teams because they were just managing themselves just fine. And what I always bring is there's a wonderful blog post from the author of SAFe himself about what he calls essential SAFe. So somebody once asked him, when does a team do SAFe well? And then he said, well, it's very hard to say, but if they at least check these boxes, then they're doing SAFe really, really well. And essential safe is basically everything taken away except that part that looks a lot like Nexus and LeSS. It still has a few additional puppets, but to me, that's always kind of the aspirational picture that I take forward to see. All right, let's see if we can bring it to this scale instead of across the whole organization and everybody else.
I agree with you, Jesse. And I should say that I've encountered and worked with SAFE and helped actually even train SAFE 4 different times in companies. So I think a lot of the LeSS trainers might not have done that or might not want to do that, but I have done it for various reasons, mostly to help clients. And I think Essential Safe is really pretty harmless. And there's something that I actually like in SAFE, which is the portfolio level as it's been updated through heavy consulting by Luke Holman, whose company Dean Leffingwell bought, Weave Innovation Games, the Continuo company that built Weave and Innovation Games. And there are some useful ideas there. I think the Kanban approach that Nexus apparently uses, and I think I've just read about it briefly, so Richard could expand more if you wanted to, may resemble a lightweight overall view that could be used to model a portfolio. The LeSS authors generally are against fake portfolio management and creating complexity just so you have a portfolio, and I totally get that and agree with that. But I also see companies that really do have portfolios of real products, and they really do need to make higher level decisions about trade-offs. And I don't want to ignore that problem.
Thanks for clarifying, Greg.
Sure.
But yeah, begs the question. So yet, SAFE versioning is so massive, and market penetration is almost alien. I mean, there's so much of market penetration by SAFE, so it begs the question: how come? Why? But that is only
because anybody on the uncle can train it without any qualifications. That's probably one reason there's so much of it.
No.
Sorry, it's a little nasty.
Yep. Yeah. Let's not digress anymore.
Sorry. Yeah.
But I hear what you're saying. Yeah. Okay, so let's see what else we can pick from the bag. We got how have you seen remote working change the frameworks? I guess that would pertain to both Nexus and LeSS. So what do we do as LeSS people and versus what do you guys do as Nexus people when it comes to mandated remote work? We're all, homebound at the moment. Richard, would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't even a scale question. Even single team Scrum, how would they handle it? Your mileage may vary. Some people are wired to be in the same room at the same whiteboard designing, side by side, high fidelity. Some people are wired to be working at home with their cameras off. So I can't say how mileage is gonna vary for you. I will say for some of the bigger meetings that it might actually bring more attendance because you don't have to get people in the same room, same time zone. I don't know how participation is going to be though, where you're trying to solve complex problems on the fly, in a time box. But again, mileage will vary there. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
Thanks. Greg, what do you think?
I think that the reality is that people are working from home and they're still working, and that we need to support them. And a lot of people are suffering. And it actually makes me a little bit angry to just say, oh, it doesn't work with distributed teams and good luck, because everybody is distributed. So what I've seen is this, all these surprises of things actually working much better than I would have thought. And a lot of us would have thought when we're adamant about physically co-located teams. And it turns out that people are adaptive and are able to work in many ways. And there have been some positive surprises. I've seen the LeSS training, for example, online become actually better than in person. And I've heard from a number of team members and coaches who are working virtually that management thought they would be much less productive and have many more problems. And they're proving them wrong. And they're actually as or more productive than they were before. They don't have to commute anymore. So I expect long-term shifts based on the big, huge experiment we've all been doing the last year.
Thank you for clarifying this. It almost begs the question people ask, and rightfully so, they have a right to ask, how does Lexus, how does Nexus and how does LeSS react to virtual situation? What if you have a big monumental battleship Missouri size other framework with thousands of people and thousands of layers? What's the impact in that? I mean, what's more resilient to these virtual conditions, and what's more vulnerable? 50, 60 people working very closely, or a few hundred people working with a bunch of intermediate layers and translation points. So comparable, right? Another interesting question here, which is, so I'm just going to give it at face value. How does Nexus coordinate platform components that are shared by multiple products? And I think I'm going to ask Greg also chime in on this one. So I guess it's also about product centricity and product definition. And
yep, I was going to say product definition. If we can define our product broad enough that all of that can be brought into one Nexus, there's your answer. But if not, if we're talking about hundreds of developers and several products with their own product management, all sharing a common platform. An example I like to use is Google Chrome. You've got the Google Chrome platform, and on top of it you've got the browser, and on top of that also on the platform you've got the App Store and the partner ecosystem. Yeah, you might have to have a separate Nexus just to look after the platform. Again, I don't know how broad this is.
I'll just give a specific example of that problem and how it was addressed in a company I worked with. So we had 3 product lines in a platform, and the product lines it was online gaming, and they depended on the platform for things like opening accounts, billing, payments, risk management, regulatory. And the outcome was that we internally open sourced the platform, which had about a 6 to 9 month queue, wait time for changes to be made that were needed by the customer facing value generating product lines. Don't choke them. Oh no, Gene's getting choked. So basically platforms can be implemented and useful technically, but if they're viewed as products and they don't actually generate revenue, they reduce customer centricity. So, and I think they can generate bottlenecks. So I personally prefer what Richard was saying, that they're pulled within the Nexus and there are no external dependencies. And if they aren't, then I'd have a perfection vision of simplifying them, their complexity, and spreading knowledge about them so that people can self-serve using strangler pattern and other techniques until eventually you don't have this big monolithic code base that's probably slowing down value delivery. But that was from one experience. I'm sure there are people who are big advocates of platform approach to software, and if their actual business is like Salesforce or Amazon Web Services, and they're basically building a business that offers these services to others, it's a different situation.
Yep. You're muted, Gene.
His throat has been permanently choked.
I think he choked too hard.
I'll have that. I'll take it up with him later. I apologize for that. I see Jesse have been knocking off some questions as they come. So I guess at least on Richard's behalf. So let me just take a quick look. We usually budget for 1 hour. I'm happy to extend for a little longer if you guys are flex and there are people wish to ask. Why don't we open up a lifeline, right? Someone wants to ask a question, just ask, but make it succinct and unmute only if you ask.
I have a question. Jesse, where'd you get the cool GitHub stuffed animal back there?
Yeah, it got flown in from the US. It must be much cheaper to get it there where you live than to where I live.
That's really cool. My kids would destroy it, but it's neat.
I'll send you the link. I've got 2 on backup.
Tabasson, actually, she was in my class. Funny, she said, why don't we? That was a Freudian slip, by the way. Lexus.
Yeah, nice. Yeah.
It was great.
Somebody wants to drive a car, huh? A nice, luxurious car. Well, okay, that's, I guess, It's to the founders, not to us. Any other questions, folks? Please.
I have a question. I'm
Michael.
just curious about the knit in the daily scrum and how often you see the knit being in the daily scrum. At this, like, I know it might rotate, but how often are they to the same people?
We prefer them not to be the same people.
Okay.
And hopefully we're gonna we added clarification in the latest version of the Nexus guide to say that the appropriate people should be showing up. And appropriate means the people who have the knowledge or who are experiencing the problem, but if and that every team needs to be represented. The problem is if a team might not know they have a problem, so in that case they don't know how to show up. So usually the team picks one person that's kind of always going to show up just in case, and then if a team member shows up as well, then that's just fun. And some teams choose that person to be the next integration team member. Other teams just do that by rotation. Nexus doesn't necessarily have an opinion about that, but I think culturally there are certain cultures where it's more likely for the Nexus integration team to carry status, and therefore they will show up. And in other cultures, these people will understand that it's not their business to kind of mingle with everybody all the time, and to kind of use the bottom-up intelligence from the team to surface the issues, and to actually challenge people to show up instead of them, because that's probably kind of more valuable kind of in the longer term. So that's what we hope. And then the Nexus integrations team's job is to coach people towards that kind of status where bottom-up intelligence can work. So hopefully, if they're doing their job well, just like a Scrum Master, at some point they're no longer running the Nexus daily Scrum, just like the Scrum Master is hopefully not running your normal team's daily Scrum. And then we're kind of in a blissful situation.
I back the feedback from Greg as well, because I think it's something that's worth mentioning. How do we address unless representatives go into
Thanks for asking me, because I do feel strongly about this, and I have a concern about having a constant, as you say, in some, you don't have an opinion about it. In some cultures, it may be a status and there may be a regular participant. I'm concerned about the injection of hierarchy and a de facto manager who also has influence in getting things done, quote unquote, through the teams, who may then have more than one boss. They basically have the product owner giving them work, but also some guy from the net comes over and says, this is really pretty critical. We're not integrating properly. You better refactor these 40 pages of code so that we can. And it's just bingo. You have no more time to work on anything else in the sprint. So I really like that unless there's only one source of requirements, which is the product owner. And then in terms of representatives, I always want them to rotate. And I prefer a pair from every team. And I prefer the pair be someone more junior and someone more senior, because the diversity of thinking improves communication. Not everybody hears the same thing, and it reduces bias, and it avoids favoritism or some hidden power that might arise. So I know there are other people concerned about the knit. When I talked with Richard about it, I was less concerned because I understood it's a rotation of people. It's not always the same. It's voluntary, and I felt like it was just like another team member. But even in that conversation, I was still a little concerned that the knit's priority always trumps the team's priority, from what I understood, if there's an integration problem. So I'm worried that weakens the team's core membership. And whenever I've seen in other less instances where, let's say there's a duty to support production, and the pattern is we pull some people out of teams to go work on this urgent problem. Generally, the people that get pulled out are the strongest, having the most impact and most weakening the remaining teams. And everybody sees the firefighter response and they celebrate, we solved that problem. And they don't see the huge reduction in velocity of the teams that were depending on one person that now are falling down. On the other side, when you pull out that strongest person, perhaps to the net or to an equivalent makeshift team that has happened in less setups, the team fills the vacuum and can rise to the occasion. So it's not a black and white answer, but I still have that concern. I would prefer to see rotation, and I would prefer to confront the cultural norm that is looking for a hierarchical status position and try to strip that away. Because I think it creates bad things generally. But
Thank you, Greg. And I think the rotation and the idea of, joining in to have more junior, more senior person is a great idea. I think it's very consistent. In fact,
it's totally in line. I was reflecting that we're seeing this happening. It's not that we want this to happen, but it's something to be wary of. Absolutely. Also, the Nexus integration team has the product owner on the team. So if anybody would say something that was kind of against product owners' set priorities, that would be strange. At the same time, since the product owner can only deliver an integrated increment, if integration is failing, done will not be met. If done won't be met, there's no value at all. So that's how we kind of say that if integration fails, Nexus trumps. But other than that, the Nexus integration team would have to kind of call what we call emergency mode to actually start acting as a team, and otherwise they have to do all of the work through the Scrum teams. So they have to delegate the work in some way or form to get it done. There are some safeguards, but yeah.
Well, that helps, because I think we see the same dynamic. The organization will try to go back into firefighting mode and a hero culture, and show me an expert and I'll show you a bottleneck. And the more that expert gains the expertise, the more other people don't have it. So I think we're aware of the dynamic, and that's just so, I guess I would be kind of active about hacking the culture to reduce that dynamic. There's one other example I wanted to mention because it's pertinent. And at an automotive company doing autonomous driving, part of the definition of done was to deploy the software on the car, to have it run on the car, and the sprint review would include driving the car or letting the car drive you, with seatbelts on, obviously, because it was early days. And the ideal situation was the duty of installing on the car would rotate among the teams, and every team would have their chance to do it, and that would spread knowledge. That's the kind of idealism of the coaches. And the reality was, actually, some teams really don't want to do it, and they're really bad at it. And when they're really bad at it, everyone feels depressed because the whole review is screwed. And some teams really like doing it. So we found a kind of a happy medium of about a third of the teams that like doing it, and it spread knowledge adequately. So sometimes the theory of spreading knowledge everywhere is impossible in complex environments, and bottling up in one person is also undesirable, and you can find some kind of happy medium. And it's hard to say where exactly, that falls, except by experience and empiricism.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Greg. So we have the panel. So the bridge is open, guys. Anyone wants to, ask a question just by asking? Unmute, ask, and mute again.
I want to ask one. Is there a space or a place for Agile coaches in Nexus?
Yes, but we call them Scrum Masters.
Greg?
So the answer is no.
Yes, we call them Scrum Masters.
Thank you, Richard.
Sorry.
Thank you for the question, Margaret. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak on top of it. Margaret, thank you for the question. Richard, thank you for the short answer. Greg, your version?
So there's no formal role called Agile coach, but often in a less adoption, there are people who are called Agile coaches. And some groups still use the XP terminology, and they don't call the Scrum Master, but they call them an Agile coach. So they're actually not using Scrum terminology or less terminology, but the person is actually operationally acting as a Scrum Master would in Scrum. The idea what I would say is that any coach should be able to act as Scrum Master, and it's good if they do act as Scrum Master. The problem with external coaches is they usually go away, and sometimes suddenly, and that's not good when the Scrum Masters go away suddenly. So,
thank you, Greg. True or false? In order for this to be true, we don't just pick a Scrum Master off the street and someone with a label Scrum Master and plug him into LeSS or Nexus. It's got to be a seasoned, well-versed, well-rounded, experienced person. And that really has to jive well with the organizational perception of the role, as opposed to this being a part of a, hierarchical reporting schema. A coach gets paid more than a Scrum Master, and therefore, blah blah. True or false? Yeah.
False. I mentioned this, I think, to one of you guys earlier, but my best experience with a Scrum Master was someone who had no business background, no technical background. His previous job just recently was a drug and alcohol counselor, which meant he knew how to listen. He knew how to provide advice in a light-handed way. He knew when people weren't doing all they could. He knew when people were lying. And that's what they needed. They didn't need someone that knew Jira and how to create tickets or something stupid like that.
I love Richard's response.
So being a devil's advocate, right? And so please don't read between. Any more questions? Because I want to make sure people ask real time, because I have something that's dovetailing off of what Richard just said. So tooling, so massive, excessive, abusive. What's LeSS and Nexus stance on tooling and tooling solutions to organizational problems? Richard, with you. Let me start with you.
Let the Nexus decide.
Greg.
Yeah, LeSS is silent about that. It's people and their interactions over processes and tools. So. Yep.
But so, true or false, then maybe one of the reasons why SAFe is so amazingly successful with respect to penetrating organization is because almost every tool that has the word Agile in it has golden partnership with it. Is it a fair assumption to make? Companies that use SAFe, they are extremely comfortable with using it in conjunction with tooling.
Which is interesting because at the team level, they're doing Scrum. Nexus and LeSS look a lot like Scrum. So all of the tools that support SAFe support Nexus and will support LeSS. You probably have to turn off 7,000 features, or maybe not enable them. I suppose that any tool that can help SAFe might support you doing Scrum. But then again, I know many Scrum teams that already hate Jira. So and it doesn't really get much simpler than that. So most teams I work with, they love Post-its on a wall, which has become really hard. So nowadays we use things like Mural and Miro, virtual Post-its on a virtual wall, but still allow free format.
I have a funny story.
But yes, it makes it easier to sell. Getting all the gold partnerships and all the official stamps makes it wonderful to sell, of course.
I heard a funny story about tooling, and it was a SAFe-like organization. And there was a presentation on their HP portfolio management system integration with Jira. And there were a few slides, and the presenter, the architect, and the developer for this system was explaining how it worked. And basically you plan everything on the portfolio level on the HP portfolio management system. And then you export that with traceability down to Jira. So you can see which epics and stories are broken down in the issues in Jira. That I hate the word issue for requirements. That the issues are traceable back to the portfolio. And so I asked a question. I said, so, when the teams are splitting items and the estimates are adjusted when they estimate and re-estimate their work, how does the interface work to import that back into the portfolio? And they said, well, what do you mean? There would be no importation back. I said, well, but the estimates might change. He said, no, we don't want them to change. It's like, You want a really nice illusion. So the people will pay quite a bit for tools that tell them what they want to hear, and they're not necessarily what they need to hear. It's much better to go to Gemba, talk to people, see what's happening, and not be looking at these tools all the time. They're really quite disastrous for that reason.
But I've heard that Jira is going to have an auto estimate feature in the next version. So gosh, we don't need to talk to each other. We just hit the button and it just forecasts for us.
Yeah, a year and $1 million.
That's it.
You just blew the gasket on this one for many people. Did you realize?
Now we're talking about Jira. Gosh, it's like, what's that principle that as soon as you degrade the conversation to talk about Jira, it's over or safe or something?
Yeah. All right, let's stay civil. So go ahead.
I have a question. I've heard that you said that kind of in a Nexus, one PO you're resolving by leveraging and equipping the dev teams to learn more about taking more a PO role. I read a lot, but I've never seen in practice. Is it something that sprint planning you have to do sequentially so that PO is available to do kind of some answering quick questions, or you can run in parallel because teams during the previous kind of the big planning will get all the inputs? I just don't know if that can be impediment. So if you can get me from how that works in practice, especially if it's not just 3 teams, but let's say like 7. So thanks.
No, that's a good question. It's a common question. And I'll have Jesse jump in here in a minute, but we try to go back to what is it that the product owner really needs to do, and oftentimes there's a misconception with they're the ones that actually put stuff in the backlog, and they're the ones that, coordinate all the meetings and make all the introductions to the stakeholders. And just like with single team professional Scrum, we want the developers to go talk to people themselves. During sprint planning, we bring the stakeholders in, and they don't need an introduction by the product owner or be a proxy there. That said, we do say the container for Nexus sprint planning is a big room meeting, not just for the pre-meeting, but also during the individual team sprint plannings, because it could be that an hour into it, team 3 has an issue because their JavaScript developer is not going to be there this thing, and they just realize that, oh no, we can't work on this PBI because our JavaScript knowledge is going to be decreased this sprint, so therefore we've got to put this PBI back maybe for another team to pick up. Well, the product owner needs to be part of those conversations, so they're going to be popping in and out of these virtual meeting rooms or whatever until all the team sprint backlogs are completed. So they don't need to run sequentially, but the product owner is going to probably be a busy person during Nexus sprint planning, or need a lot of assistance. And Jesse, what do you add to that?
Well, what we often see is that the product owner has already been involved a lot in cross-team refinement. Hopefully has a pretty clear defined goal. Scrum 2020 introduced the product goal, so hopefully that's already aligning up many teams. Has a prospective Nexus goal in mind, so has already talked about that during cross-team refinement, because why else would those topics be at the top of the product backlog unless something really different happened last weekend, which is of course always possible. In that case, you're going to have a really a busy day as a product owner. And one of the questions that came by is, what do you do with all the product management people that form the product management team right now? And kind of our answer is, there's only one product owner, but that doesn't mean that those people aren't adding any value. It's just that a Scrum team is a cross-functional team that has all of the skills and responsibilities and functions and knowledge in it so that they can deliver something of value at the end of every sprint. So if those product people are needed in order to deliver value, then they should be part of your teams. So in Nexus, you've got 3 to 9 teams, which means that there's 3 to 9 places where those people might end up. We don't call them product owners; we just call them developers, and we treat them with the value that they add, just like any other person on the team that we call a developer. And the Scrum Guide changes. There's been a lot of discussion about kind of the term developer. Should we get rid of it? Should we get rid of the term development team? And it actually turns out that there's been a lot of research being done on that term, and only in IT do we have a problem with that. If you explain kind of Scrum or Nexus, or probably less, to a marketing team that's going to create a marketing campaign and does a whole bunch of creative and complex work in order to get that thing shipped, they don't mind being called developers. But if you tell an average IT department that the architect is suddenly a developer, all hell breaks loose. And it's strange, but it's so it shouldn't be something to fear that you become part of the group of developers. It's actually an honor, because it means that you are so valuable that you are part of the group and that you're adding value to the product and you're helping ship it.
Hey Jesse, please do not this is in our meetup. We don't insult PowerPoint architects. Please do not call them developers.
I call them very valuable members of the Scrum team generally, but they don't like that either. So I haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah, well, it's a hierarchical problem, I think. But thank you for clarifying this, by the way, Jesse. Hey, someone pinged me privately, and this is kind of so we less Nexus less. Some people are offering to marry, stuff. It's pretty funny. We do diverge from time to time. Mentioned something about safe. There was a private question just came in. How about Scrum at scale, which is another way of so anyway, fast forwarding to the question. There was a Scrum of Scrums and Scrum of Scrum of Scrums and Scrum of Scrum of Scrum of Scrums, and very fractal way of doing things. And every team has a product owner essentially, right? And what's the take on that, Richard? Do you have any thoughts?
I don't know anything about it.
Okay.
Sorry.
I know a little bit about it. I think it's simpler to not have a product owner for every team from the point of view of optimizing the whole, going back to my systems thinking comment. On the other hand, people who've been doing Scrum with a product owner per team gain relationship, affinity, feelings that they want to keep the person on the team. They want to keep working with them. And when you go from single team Scrum to probably Nexus, and certainly I know from experience with LeSS, there's some sadness people have in losing their team product owner. So I have worked with a company that wasn't a LeSS adoption, but it was a kind of roll your own agile scaling approach. And they kept a product owner per team. And the way that they dealt with optimization of the whole was they had a meetup of these product owners who'd align on a roadmap. And you can do that and it can work out. But I think it's more complex. It might also be more satisfying to the team. So you've kind of got to balance the human concerns with the system thinking logical concerns. Usually what happens to those individual product owners per team is they do get rolled into teams. And sometimes they decide to leave the company because they want to work in product management. They don't want to work in the product team. So it depends on where their head is at. And you don't, to me, whenever good people leave a company during your transformation, you've probably blown it.
Yep. Good perspective. Folks, thank you. So first of all, I would probably want to wrap in a couple of minutes because it seems like people are dropping, and as we make this dialogue longer, chances that it will be replayed in full drop, are getting lower. So any other pressing questions, folks? Any pressing questions or comments or wishes from the audience? Minus the three speakers, including Jesse. Sounds like it's a plenty for Saturday, right? Cool. So what I would like to do, I would like to, genuinely, sincerely thank both of you guys, and Jesse plus you. Thank you for coming out and supporting Richard.
Thanks, Jesse.
It was a great session.
Thanks, David.
I'll definitely make this recording available. I'll try to syndicate it wider. If you have any materials, well, there were only 2 slides, right? Just send them to me, and I'll upload them and I'll make them available along with the video. But I suspect those are just 2 images, right? So there is no 1,000 PowerPoint deck, or 1,000 pages PowerPoint decks.
I think Greg and I put some links in the chat, to the Nexus guide and to the LeSS framework.
Yeah, if you just don't mind it. So I'll try to export the chat,
Okay.
and I'll parse it a little bit. I'll take those links. Plus, if anything else you want me, if you wish me to add to the blog, I'll create a small blog and syndicate it. Please do so within the next couple of hours. Okay, and I want to thank you all for joining, folks, and for your questions, participation, and of course, the speakers. Many thanks to you all. Okay. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks to you, Gene, and Jesse and Richard. I love the collaboration, and I loved getting to see everybody coming out on a Saturday, especially the people I already knew. It's really nice to see David there, also in Paris.
Yes, well, hello from us to
Yes,
you.
I was all about this.
People from all.
Thank you.
all
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Great insights.
Thank you.
Saturday, guys.
Thanks, friends.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Richard, Gene,
Yep.
Jess,
Cheers,
and
everybody.
Greg.
Thanks, Gene, again.
Richard, you're the one who needs to finish because you're the host. So you need to.
I'm the host, huh? I'm going to give you that privilege back.
Most with
But
the most.
You can keep your channel open all day and just keep talking about Nexus now.
that's right. Put my daughter on here and have her read the Nexus guide.
All right. Okay. I'm
So
just
it's the
gonna.
diehards now, or the people that aren't listening to us anymore that are still on.
Yeah, I may want to kill the recording.